Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets blow it. It's no reason to overreact, but we will break down what went wrong in the second half against the Oklahoma City Thunder as the Nets look to continue to roll in a positive fashion on both ends of the floor, but frankly, came out with a bit of a fizzle.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, the owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms, and tell you that today's episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Basketball GM. If you ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, visit theultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code, all caps, locked on in the game. And Doug, I'm going to keep it cool here, man. I'm a cucumber tonight. I'm not going to sweat this loss. We're going to talk about where it went wrong for Brooklyn against OKC. I'm treating it as a speed bump, not, a pothole that just blew a tire out on the side of I-95.
Well, look, we only did this to ourselves, and it was the second that we decided to do yesterday's podcast about if they can make it to the fourth seed. And this is just wash, rinse, repeat with your boy here, because the second I can't get a prediction out of my mouth where the opposite doesn't happen fast enough and in just like spectacular fashion. It's pretty unbelievable. I need to actually just go the other way. But if I try starting to make it happen the other way, it'll just reverse it again, and none of it will work. Because yesterday we do the podcast where, the Nets have the fourth seed and they can get this high. They're playing really well. OKC is going to be a tough game, but it's totally winnable. And in the first half, it looks, totally the case. They look really, really good. They had a few lucky things go their way, I think, but for the most part, they're playing really well. And to say the wheels came off in the second half is not giving, junk cars their due. It was so bad in the second half on really every level, from like coaching scheme, just execution, bad luck. It checked every bad box in the second half of this game. And we'll go through it all, but it's just a really, really disappointing loss when you can starting to set your sights on certain aspects of the standings that start looking less attainable with every loss. I'll say it that way. Like, the wins and losses do really matter at this point.
Yeah, 121-107 is the final here on a night when Cleveland won. So again, if you're going to talk about the fourth seed, you really can't follow it up with losing an effective full game in the standings as you're trying to look up at Cleveland, knowing that those two games with them do loom large. But you said it, first half of this game, first 24 minutes, it was all going in the same direction that the recent games have gone for them. And then the third quarter comes, and, this is why I don't overreact to it, because sometimes good looks don't go down. The Nets run absolutely cold from the field in the third quarter. The thing that was frustrating is what was going on the other end for me, where Lou Dort is finding himself in the corner and in the corner and in the corner and in the corner. It just, the lapses defensively is what frustrated me there. They run hot, OKC, certainly, but it did feel like, unlike other games too, where Nets have battled back, Nets have clamped down defensively, they just seem to kind of have a little bit of a give to the defensive attitude in the third quarter. And then I didn't feel that sense of recovering in the fourth to get back into this one, even though they had their moments, they had their opportunities. And at that point, it came down to some SGA plays, certainly, and even a little bit of Josh Giddey, who was quiet after the first quarter for 2+. Then he gets his couple of opportunities and really affected the game with his assist, being a facilitator as he got penetration into the lane.
Yeah, look, it was like when I say it was every kind of single thing went wrong here, it really, really was that. The third quarter, they lose the third quarter 38-20, and they kind of still hung around after that, but you could really feel the tide turning. You mentioned Dort. Dort has absolutely smoked them over the last 2 seasons. He shot like 61% from 3. So that's just something that's just happened against them. And then, a lot of other things that sort of have been hallmarks of Nets problems this season show up here as well. They got destroyed in the paint. Now, look, the Thunder are really good. The Thunder want to put rim pressure on you. SGA is one of the absolute very best guys in the entire league at kind of getting to the rim, having full body control. It's like unstoppable kind of in some ways. Like he has full body control in and around the rim, and they know that, and they want to put rim pressure on you. Now the Nets have all season have had struggles defending, against points in the paint. And that was the case here. Like OKC had 66, it was 66-38 in points in the paint. And I'll be honest with you, it could have been way worse. Like the Thunder missed a lot of very easy shots. Like they missed easy shots early in the game, had a couple calls go. I know no Nets fans ever want to hear this, but the calls actually went the Nets' favor in the first half of this game, especially around the rim. Almost like 3 consecutive plays for SGA that were probably bad calls that went in the Nets' favor. And then in the second half, they just they were hedging screens. They they just couldn't stop anything getting to the rim, which then leads to these wide open 3-pointers too, right? Yeah. It's like because if the shot at the basket's not going to happen, then we just have Lou Dort or Jalen Williams or these guys, Josh Giddey near the end, just standing wide open for 3 because they're tripling down on trying to stop these guys at the rim, which they're not doing. And when they're on the like, they're not doing it at all. And then on the rare times where they do speed bump them a little bit, there's just wide open shooters. It was just really a rough scene, like on that end of the court. And look, I know Shea is really, really good at this. Like he's among the best. Like he's his body. Just to reiterate this again, like his body control around the rim, it's like unbelievable how quickly he can slow down and stop and just kind of and then like Euro step you or just kind of pivot step you around the rim. The Nets really struggle with it, and it's just not been something they've been very good at all season defending around the rim. And OKC just took full advantage.
Yeah, and frankly, there's some things that rear their head in terms of consistency. But to your point about, as we'll talk about for me on the Nets side of things, a very specific feature that they couldn't seem to sort themselves out here in the second half with coming up. But in that third quarter specifically, something about the lane penetration and what the OKC was able to do differed in the first half, where it felt like I was looking at it and thinking, OKC is not a big team. They don't have a ton of size. This should be very manageable. To your point, is SGA the best player on the floor? Okay, make that case. But the Nets are supposed to, in this new version of them, have this versatile collection of defensive players that can switch, that can stay at home and still be effective. So that was a really frustrating point to me. And it is something that when the Nets are running bad, that's what usually stands out as the more glaring issue. You try to correct, you overcorrect, as you said, still make the same mistakes, and then also leave yourself open up for a lot of other issues. So I do want to mention what the Nets struggled with here more specifically, and less about even what OKC was doing so well. We'll tap into that here coming up in 1 second. But the first thing I got to tell you about is something that I mentioned at the top, and that is the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. I said it, if you ever dreamed about being an NBA GM, and I've tried, I've put my hat in the ring. When fans were upset with Sean Marks, I said, give me a look, guys. I'm raiding Jersey. It didn't get any bites. So I went over to the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, where I get to manage every single aspect of it, hiring the right coaches, the assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft and all those ups and downs that come with an NBA season. I finally sorted it out in my 5th year of this franchise. I'm making the playoffs. I'm in the first round, and I'm getting bounced. Don't get nervous, Nets fans. It's not foreshadowing. You can go ahead and experience this for yourself. Locked On Nets listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, you go to basketballprogm.com, scan the code, or look it up in the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Wasn't going to be the start of a dynasty tonight, Doug, because the Nets are having a lot of problems. The thing that bothers me about the Nets in this game and in the second half, and this happens with a lot of teams, and I was stumbling to find my words there in the first segment. When the Nets start to struggle, and sometimes I think it is a product on the defensive end, when these waves come, when big 30-plus point quarters happen for the opposition, the offense then loses all of the tenets that I love so much early in the game. The extra passes, maintaining the floor spacing, finding the pockets that Mikal Bridges. There was a great sequence in the first half where Spencer Dinwiddie hits Mikal Bridges using a screen just inside the arc on the curl, a leading pass. And then Bridges gets to settle down into his pocket and hit the mid-range jumper that we've come to enjoy so much from him. After the third quarter, though, and even in the third quarter, it became a not heavy hero ball, but a lot of guys looking to make that big play, the three-point shot, which the Nets need if they're going to win games. But also when it's not falling, you got to find something better to do. And I just feel like there's far too many stretches when the Nets are unwilling to go to something else, to try to get back to their core. And for a coach in Jacques Vaughn, who's usually done a great job of calling quick timeouts, I thought he was actually a little bit slow to call a timeout and try to get this team reset when things were going off the rails.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I didn't have like huge qualms with with what they were actually trying to execute. I personally didn't think it was all that different than what they've been really running, which is just mostly just going to be Spencer, and Spencer pick and roll. I mean, they had some problems with this and or trying to penetrate the lane and passing out. They did miss some kind of easy threes at times that would have maybe changed the game. I think there were some decent looks. I do think there's probably an element that they looked a little gassed. Like, I don't know. Dinwiddie specifically it's not a knock on him. He's played really well. He looked tired, and when he's the full, sort of the fulcrum of the offense for long stretches, coming off the game in Denver at altitude and all this other stuff. And he's had a heavy load on him. I think there probably was a fatigue factor here a little bit that probably contributed to it. I don't actually have huge qualms with the offensive execution in the second half. Maybe you think you want to see hey, the shots aren't going down. You want to bring in Cam. You want to do something like that to maybe spark some offense because it's not happening and it looks a little stagnant. You just need a different look at this point. I do think OKC to some degree sort of figured out what was going on. It's why, Dinwiddie getting to the basket wasn't easy at all, right?
Sure.
They were just happy to sort of allow him to operate into the lane and then kind of live and die with the three. And if it wasn't going in, it was fine. Again, I'm of the mind that the Nets don't have too many other cards to play in terms of execution with some of this stuff, and that's not being apologetic to Vaughn by any degree. But yeah, I don't really. I guess in the moment I wasn't finding really, really difficult parts of their execution. Maybe on a rewatch it'll show up different, but it doesn't change the outcome here. It looked really, really bad, and. It did look somewhat stagnant, and it did look in sharp contrast to what you said, because the first half there was, I would say, extreme ball movement.
Yes, maybe that's what it is, right? It's not even that it's so bad in the second half. It just looks so good in the first half, and maybe that's what I'm drinking the Kool-Aid of. It should look like that for 48 minutes. We shouldn't have letdowns here, and maybe I'm getting over my skis on what they have and what they lack, right?
I take it back. There was one major problem I had with their offensive scheme in the second half. I forgot this. It was that the second SGA has 4 fouls, and they have actually been really good at this in the past. The second that he has 4 fouls, they have to be attacking him in pick and roll every time, and they just weren't. And it's weird because, and actually I will put this one on Vaughn. And I should have just mentioned this before. They've been good about finding these guys in these situations and putting real legitimate pressure on those foul situations, especially when it's your best player. When that guy gets 4 fouls, it has to be your edict to get him out of the game. And just put pressure. And even if the shots look bad, you have to put him in pick and roll. You have to rescreen till you find either Bridges or Spencer Dinwiddie on him and put pressure. And I will say they didn't do that at all. And I think actually that would have been a way to shift the game a little bit. They just let the Thunder completely off the hook. If you have a superstar that has 4 fouls, who's not the world's best defender, which he isn't, and he's a fine defender, but they have to go after him, and they just didn't do that at all. And I think in that aspect, they did let the Thunder off the hook.
No, I'm really glad that you brought it up because I made the note of it in the moment. I mean, you see that in real time, and then right out the old trap door that I call my mind. So I'm glad that you brought that up, especially in the third quarter. And the other thing that stood out, which gets skewed by the fact that they go to some hack-a-clacks here in this one and put him at the line. I was very buoyed by the fact that even though when you look at his overall free throw numbers, they mentioned it on the broadcast tonight, Ryan Rucco and Sarah Kustok, that he's actually been hitting over 65% over the last handful of games. I think they said 10 or 15 game sample size, closer to 15 than 10. But this one, he had to struggle through that and fight through it. But when you look at the disparity in shot attempts, that was a big part of it as well. In the third quarter alone, the Thunder had doubled up the Brooklyn Nets in shot attempts. Now, it gets affected by the fact that you're putting Claxton to the line for 3 consecutive possessions there. And it's not going to change the fact that you just weren't finding that consistent rhythm. And that's where you mentioned gassed. There was a lot of sequences where, frankly, it just looked like the pass wasn't quite as crisp as it had been in the first half. The legs getting to the spot weren't quite as crisp as they've been. And if we want to give not an excuse, but just an obvious thing coming, as you said, from Denver, if the legs start to go on you, that's where you start to see the perimeter shots suffer first, and then everything can kind of crumble around it for the Brooklyn Nets offense. So, again, none of these things, by the way, like, I don't have any sense of, oh, boy, can they get back on track the next game? It was just very frustrating to not see a consistent level of play in this game.
Yeah, and that's a funny thing about this loss is that, like, there's I think there's levels of losses that I'm pissed off they lost for sure, because I am counting W's at this point, because I do want this to not be a sweat out situation for the play-in at all. It would be amazing to have the home court advantage for the first round of the playoffs. Like, there are real things that we want. They're like not living and dying with this in each game, but these matter. I think these really functionally matter, I think, in a way that I probably didn't see coming, especially after the trade deadline. But I will say, I do think there were there were some strategic missteps here. There were a few just kind of like, some of the stuff just didn't go in. Like, some of the looks were fine. I thought that, like you said, like getting gassed here at the end, I thought getting to the rim got a little harder. Even turning the corner on some of the defenders is why they got their pocket picked a couple times, because defenders were able to stay on the level just a little bit more and a little bit longer. And that just every little kind of inch there is going to hurt a team like the Nets. Like, the Nets are, in some ways, they have very little room for error with the way that they're constructed, like the way their offense is constructed and sort of the way they run things. I think it's what they should be doing with their current personnel. It does not leave much room for error. If the threes are not going to fall and you're going to knock speed bump just a little bit near the rim, they probably are just going to lose. Like, they just don't have, when you have Durant, you can have like a lot of things go wrong and still
then
win
Durant
games.
comes on in the fourth quarter, and
or Kyrie or guys like Kyrie, they can bail you out of just an incredible number of situations. The Nets really don't have like that full bailout guy now. So they do have to have things. Their execution is more critical now. So when the execution is not perfect or near perfect, this can be what happens, right? And it's a bummer. This is the way they're constructed. I do have some cool Dinwiddie stats that we'll get to in a second. But in general, I think that's kind of what we saw, is that they just don't have, like, they don't have like totally another gear, right? They don't have that next gear to hit. And so when they're not hitting that, I think like the snowball can start rolling downhill in a bad way.
Yeah, it's funny. We'll talk about Spencer Dinwiddie. I want to ask a philosophical question about being a sports fan when it comes to your team and losses like this. But I will say, you mentioned that about the gear. We drive around, Courtney, my partner and live-in lover. And we cruise down the highway in her Honda Civic. It's a sweet cherry whip that's been through a lot. Boy, I can rock that thing a consistent 72, 73 miles an hour, and it feels like it's cherry. At about 76, 77, gets a little wobbly, and all of a sudden things are a little bit squirrely, right? So it's like the sweet spot is the sweet spot, and it's better than most, right? I'm not in the slow lane, but I can only charge so many revs before things can get a little bit wonky, and maybe that's the best way to kind of encapsulate this team as they continue to try to figure things out along the way.
Matt or Adam thinks the Nets are, whatever year Honda Civic. That's not going to go over well. Pull that.
Well, you don't know what year it is. I didn't tell you what year the car was.
All right. I got a cool Spencer Dinwiddie stat. We'll talk about some philosophical questions here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. We are barreling toward the end of the season into the playoffs. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, just download the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, threes drained, a stat that is near and dear to one Mr. Adam Armbrecht's heart right now, because his same game parlay over on FanDuel for this one was, how many checks? We hit 9 out of the 10 checks, and what'd you miss it on?
7 out of 8, baby. Missed it on Dorian Finney-Smith and one more three-pointer.
and you're not going to want to hear, our friends on FanDuel aren't going to count this, but there was one of his 3-pointers that went down, but it was on an offensive foul. So they should count that. I'm going to email FanDuel.
I prefer the payout. I'll take it.
There we go. Just a little bit what you're going to get going over on FanDuel. Like I said, spread, money line, total, player props, points, rebounds, assists. It's all there for you. Don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And when you are done over on FanDuel, you are going to need the bite to eat, or you're going to take your winnings and you're going to want to just double down and grab a bite to eat in the Brooklyn area. That is where our friends from Brooklyn Borough come in. The best Cali Mexican food in the area, 922 Fulton Street in Brooklyn, a couple stops from Barclays. If you're over there for the game or you just live over in Brooklyn, this is a Nets-centric place, folks. The food backs it up. They got a Joe Harris-related dish on the menu over there. Our boy Pepe knows how to do it. It's a San Francisco Mission District burritos, off the charts. The tacos, the bowls, the quesadillas, the salsa bar that you're not going to be able to rip yourself away from. House-made chips. Look, they take a lot of pride in their food. We've been there. We've eaten with these guys. It backs it up. When you take a lot of pride in something, when you absolutely hustle, that is what you get over at Brooklyn Borough. Easiest read we're going to ever do. They got the ice cold cervezas, the tasty margaritas on tap. Locked On Nets fans, this is what you're going to need to do. You're going to get a free baby burrito with a purchase of a Mission burrito. You just got to tell them that you're a Locked On Nets fan when you're ordering. That's all you got to do. You're located at 922 Fulton Street. Grab that free baby burrito. Just tell them you're Locked On Nets fan. Maybe just say Adam and Doug too. We're probably first name basis at this point. That is all you got to do. 922 Fulton Street. Check it out on the map. Yelp it for directions. You know how to get there. Order, unwrap, enjoy, unwrap more. Finish, come back, smile. Brooklyn Borough, 922 Fulton Street.
Pepe. All right. Philosophical question here first, because I see this happen with fans of sports all the time. And I, by the way, succumb to this. There are moments when I'm watching my team, whether it's Giants, the Nets, whatever, the Devils, and like in a moment where it looks like something's not going right and you're going to lose a game, you go, someone's responsible for this in a major way. I am surprised, though, that there is a segment of the fan base, from what I see, that seems to be willing to say that Jacques Vaughn is like, you get this job for tonight. But if I don't like what I see tonight, we're going to pull the cord on you. We're still thinking about other coaches we could have had, why we could be a better team. I don't know if I find it frustrating, annoying. There's something there I don't appreciate, though, because you can't come off of great performances from a team and love what the team is doing and then turn around in legitimately, let's just call it 12 minutes, a third quarter against OKC and go, nah, this guy doesn't have it figured out. He doesn't know how to manage rotations. He can't be the head coach. Does that irritate you at all? I'm sure that it probably doesn't, actually.
No, it doesn't irritate me. I think sometimes it's lazy to just because maybe lazy is not the right word. Maybe it's just easy, right? I think sometimes it's really hard to figure out, especially in the moment of watching basketball. It's very difficult to synthesize like exactly what's happening and the little sort of minutia that's contributing to a win or a loss. I think that's a really tough thing to do. I actually think there's actually in some ways very, very few people that can do it like in real time. And those people, you should try to seek out and follow those people as much as possible. And I'm talking like true X's and O experts. The people that can usually do it are actual front office people or people that are on the bench. And then there's a group, and then it's like levels to this thing. Like we watch a lot of hoops and you analyze it and you make sure that you're really trying to focus in on every little thing and learn as much as possible. This is my long way to say coaching is the easiest like dart to fire because one, most people don't actually know what they would want to do, except that they just see something they don't like. Yeah. And the coach, since the coach isn't playing and it's just like moving, supposedly moving the pieces around is the easiest thing to kind of just use as the problem in that case. Yeah. Like, I think that we've seen tons of things. I think that Vaughn has done really well. Like, for instance, how they attacked Jokic in a game that they just won in Denver, where they completely changed their defensive scheme against them in the second half and they won. Right. And then they made some changes. We just mentioned a few things here that we didn't like they do. I'm sure there's a million other things that happened in these games that were either positive or negative. It doesn't annoy me. We're just used to it at this point. I think that's just how it goes. I think Vaughn has done fine. I do not put this loss squarely on him. Although I did mention briefly a minute ago about a problem that we thought he had.
Of course.
Like,
Yeah.
that was a clear strategic thing.
And really what it comes down to me is like, it's fine to be critical of a decision or to question what, the decision of a coach. And by the way, to question the decisions of players when they're on the court. It's just this weird thing where then it goes to the next level of once I question this thing, then my next phase is labeling that as being indicative of what is going to be in perpetuity, right? For this coach, for this player. So I wanted to get that off my chest. And just before you get into Spencer Dinwiddie, I just want to briefly mention one of the other big problems when we talk about games like these. And you mentioned that last segment about the razor thin margins. You have to be playing with a consistent level to your highest level across the board. This was not a good bench contribution night for the Brooklyn Nets. They didn't go to them a lot here, but Royce O'Neal has been a consistent player for them. Seth Curry in recent games has been more consistent for them. And when you just look down at that bench score and you see the combined 17 points, and they only went 4 players deep, and Cam Thomas was one of them for 3 minutes that didn't matter at all, right? So you have everyone playing max minutes in that starting rotation across the board, and you have an off night from Mikal Bridges from deep, 3 of 10. Okay, still got to the line 11 times, something we're really excited about. But I think that's like that indication there. You need Royce, you need a Curry, you need a Harris. Someone has to step up every single night to support that starting unit. And then if anything gets a little bit off, you can have one really bad quarter, and that can just derail it. So worth mentioning there, but hit me with Spencer.
Oh, well, actually, before I do that, I'll just say that one thing that was a little different about what they did tonight, the Cam Thomas was actually one of the first guys off the bench. And it lasted about 10 seconds. But I was surprised that he actually did come in on the first rotation with Royce. But that was actually all he played. So I'm always curious about when I see things like that, because like clearly the plan was to play him to some degree, and then whatever they saw within the 3 minutes or whatever that he played was enough for them never to bring him back into the game. Which those are the decisions I am always curious about, because when you get an early set rotation, it's clear they want to make that happen. And then whatever happened, I mean, 3 minutes seems like a pretty short time to make a decision, but
and you got to question it because he was +4 in those 3 minutes. You know what I mean? The sample size was electric, and that's where you really question him.
Real quick, what do you think? We'll close out on this with Spencer Dinwiddie. Maybe we'll just talk a little more about Dinwiddie in the next episode or going on this week. One, take a guess how many assists he's averaging as a net.
I know that it's been better of late, but give me 5.5.
8, 7.9. And since like the last 8 games, he's 6th in the league in assists.
Because he's blown up these last 3 games, especially.
And this game he had like 7 assists in the first quarter, and then it kind of trailed off a little bit too. The assist numbers have really piled up. I think schematically, this is another thing the Nets have been doing better of late, and we've seen it more of late. I know it didn't kind of all the way come to fruition in this game, but the stagnation that it seemed like that it was happening at times with their offense, and it's funny. I complained about it specifically. I'm going to go too long here. We're going to close it out here, but I complained about it specifically in the beginning part of overtime against Minnesota, where I was like, oh my God, these like Dinwiddie would get slow-mo on him and then just kind of drive and just do whatever. And then literally since I tweeted that, he had like 100 assists because they have been focusing more on getting his offensive game moving downhill, but then passing out of it once the shot's not there at the rim. I think that is, and we've definitely seen like since that point, he had 11 assists against Minnesota. I think he had 4 in overtime. Denver had 16 assists and 11 against OKC. So anyway, the assist numbers were considerably higher than I thought they had been. And he's sitting like top 7 or top 8 in the league over the last few weeks in dimes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, just to close it out here, for the month of March, he's averaging 9.5 assists. Now, those last 3 games are big, but he also did have in the assist categories 10, 8, and 8 to kick off the start of the month against New York, Boston, and Charlotte. His low game was 4. Other than that, he's been 8 or better in the assist category. And even when you go back into the back end of the previous month, he was dialing it up. Like since he got acquired from Dallas, his assist numbers have been in the range of 6, 5, 6, and then 8, 8. Rolling over into March, and he's really kicked it off. And I think if we want to go back to when they first got him and remembering Spencer Dinwiddie of old and what his role was going to be and how you're going to have the best version of him and make the best version of starting 5, this is what it is, because he has the ability to be a scorer. He obviously has the ability to drive, but you mentioned it. you got to be able to find the guys. And as Mikal Bridges continues to emerge and Cam Johnson plays consistently, you need this guy. You need Spencer Dinwiddie, a veteran, to make the right basketball play. And he's certainly doing more of that of late.
The only guys above him right now, Halliburton, who's actually only played 3-4 games in this stretch, Harden, Chris Paul, Fred VanVleet, Jokic, and then Dinwiddie. Those are the only guys since for the month of March that have been better than him in terms of assists. All right, we're gonna get out of here. We'll stick around for YouTube Live. A bunch of folks in here. If you got questions, throw an @ Locked On Nets. We'll try to grab some before we get out of here. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. All you got to do, hit those subscribe buttons wherever you listen, totally free. And that's what helps us keep coming at you for free. Subscribe over at Locked On Nets YouTube. Subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Nets lost. I'm not doing a quote.
Oh, okay. One of the all-time great poets, Mr. Adam Armbrecht. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Post-podcast, peek behind the curtain. Some things were going on with the internet. I couldn't quite get my quotes lined up correctly, so we bail out, boys. In the chat, if you want, we'll stick around for a few minutes here. Obviously, after the loss, sometimes the room gets a little bit wonky. Maybe feel free to address my commentary around how I think the fan base can react to individual games or individual quarters and where they place blame. Maybe I'm off kilter here. Doug's already highlighting a couple of comments that we can tap into.
Yeah, 1 second. I was just scrolling through here. I'll bring up these two if you can see if I thought this was interesting. Al Mack, longtime friend of the podcast here. He did not ask this, so I don't know if he wanted this shown. But it's all right. Al's here for most shows, so I want to make sure I get something from Al up here. Why can't they treat the season as development projects? Sorry, I'm not talking into the mic, and forget the playoffs. I thought about this at the time when they first had at the trade deadline, and I kind of thought the same thing. I just think they just don't have like exactly the right person. We've said this before. I don't think they just have exactly the right personnel to develop, like, because what they're not going to do is just sit. They have too many veterans. That's the problem. They'd have to sit everybody. Right. And I just don't think you can look at guys like Mikal and Cam and Spencer Dinwiddie and just be like, hey, because these guys know what's happening here, right? Like they know when they're out there to lose. Like when Detroit puts out Killian Hayes and RJ Hampton and, Eugene Omoyori, like that's who they started tonight. Like the idea is like, hey, wouldn't mind losing, like right. They just don't have the right guys to do it. And yeah, they have David Duke Jr. and they have Day'Ron Sharpe, but like, you're just not going to play these guys over Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Nick Claxton. Like they just have the list is just Royce O'Neal, DFS. The list is too long of guys who just like are too good to just be on a tanking team. I think that is part of it. I think that is all of it. Actually, I think they just kind of have the wrong personnel to go into a full development project. They don't have enough guys to develop, and they have too many veterans who would be so pissed off if they just had to go the last 25 games of just riding the bench and watching the team try to lose. I just don't think they're set up to do it.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head. The team is too good. It's not constructed the right way. Bad teams, young teams, spend time developing at the back end and sit down veterans because you already knew coming into that roster what it was going to be. Houston didn't enter the season intending to try to win a lot of games and make the playoffs. So that construct is already in place for them. And frankly, and I love when
those guys look, and just like Houston, they're all young. Like everyone's like 24 and younger on that team. Like they don't have. Their actual problem is they don't have any veterans, so the team's a total mess.
Yeah, they could move the needle.
And right, so they're constructed to just go out and they can tank. Like even OKC, frankly, OKC has struggled to tank because I'm sure they wanted to, but SGA and Giddey, SGA specifically, was just too good. Like he was too good. And then Giddey's just like a little too good. And Jalen Williams is better than they thought. And they just now, Dort's kind of just played in his fourth season or whatever. They're just a little too good. They would love to lose. Like, but they're just, you have to be really set up to fully tank. And the Nets just are definitely not set up that way.
And honestly, too, I mean, you go back and look at it, we're talking about the games that they've played in and how it's looked. Now, and I understand the premise would be like, it doesn't matter. Who cares about these wins? But we were just talking about Spencer Dinwiddie and how he's performed. When you go back and look at it, so now, dialing in since he came over in the trade, I mean, the Brooklyn Nets started out bad after the trade, losing 6 out of their first 8 games when Spencer Dinwiddie came over. But now you dial it forward and they're a team that's won 6 out of their last 8, right? So, like, it's just... I want to be sold that there's pieces here that matter for the future of this team. And just to your point, the young guys, there's not enough young guys that you can tell me are a part of the future of this team that it matters enough to spend time developing them. when you get the next draft class in and we see what happens in the offseason, it can look different.
Yeah, and this goes along with this. I will say if I have a nit to pick, it would be that I do think that these rotations are, for the type of team that they are too tight.
Yeah.
Like I do, like, I'm not saying they should lose, and I'm not sure saying they should tank, and I just don't think they can do that. I do think it is a little weird that guys like Yuta and even Cam to some degree, or to a lot of a degree, and Sumner, that these guys don't play at all. Like, they really shouldn't be. The Nets are not an 8-man rotation team either, right? So, like, I think there is a middle ground here. Like, I do find it a little weird that these guys aren't playing at all, because, yeah. So I guess there I would agree with Al. No. And I guess I would agree with Tamro here, but
yeah, that's actually a good point. Like, I disagree that they should be developing young players this season, but I also disagree that playing Seth Curry and not playing Edmund Sumner, or playing Joe Harris and not playing Yuta Watanabe, that's equally as confusing for me, because that means
I don't even mind them playing them, like, except that the other guy's not playing at all.
That's what I mean. The balance. Yeah, the balance of minutes. Yeah.
Like, those guys not playing at all is weird. Like, I just don't. So, yes, I would say that is a little bit of a gripe. I don't totally get it. This team should be running at least 10 deep, right? And if you lose some games, you lose some games. I don't know. You kind of do have to serve it both ways here. So, yeah, anyway. So, I guess I agree in principle on two parts of this overall.
What are the other ones? Oh, tight rotation.
Oh, I can answer this one real quick. There's just no chance. There's no chance that this is true. What are the chances that Nets are avoiding a Cam Thomas injury so they can up his value for a trade package? No. And I'm not trying to, like, be didactic around this. They don't like him. There's something about him that they do not like. They don't want to play him. I don't know what it is. It's the weirdest subplot of the entire season for them outside of the trading. Oh, God, never mind. The first two weird things were trading KD and Kyrie. Then the Ben Simmons thing is also weird. The fourth most weird thing on this team this year is
we got at least 4 weird things.
Those other ones are so weird, though. So it's like this one still can be very weird and still sit fourth. This is the weirdest thing of anything on the team. They do not want to play him. It has nothing to do with avoiding his injury. It has nothing to do with his value. I don't think.
Frankly, I think the sample size has already been put out there. Like, teams know what he can be around the league. If you wanted to trade for him or they want to put in a package, like, it's all good. Like,
if anything, this hurts his trade value not playing him, because it just sends the signal that, like, what's going on here with this guy. Right. So it's the weirdest thing. I don't get it even a little bit. They just it must be it has to be just like a personality or work thing or something. Like, there's no other explanation to me.
Would you trade Cam Johnson for OG if possible?
I would, but the Raptors wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, this is funny. Like, would I? Yes. Would the Nets, like, would the Raptors? No. Would the Nets? Probably not either. And this just goes back to being tied at the hip with Mikal Bridges. Like, this is a part, and you mentioned this at the time of the trade. When you get guys back in a trade for Kevin Durant, one of the things you're also selling the fan base, like, they can be a part of the core. Now, that still means that Cam Johnson, has to play up to those expectations, but you're going to be hard pressed to, like, and I guess you got OG make a difference, but I don't think that Raptors wouldn't do it, just to your point. The other one that I'll kick out of the way here just real quick is this one, which is he's still figuring out how to use them. If you mean inside the tight rotation of the players that he has and some of the hiccups along the way, I could buy into it, but there's been a lot of consistent sample sizes where it looks like they know what they're doing and how to function, and the system is being learned. So I dismiss that. And if it's the more expansive of how to use the totality of who he has on the roster, you can't figure out how to use guys if they're not playing. So that's the way that you would know that can't be the case.
I think there's also, my guess is there's something that's coming down from the top here that said, hey, this can't be a lost season. Right. We are we're catching a falling knife because the Durant and Kyrie thing went so bad. Right. And we need to buy 100%. Back. We need to buy back a little faith here among, like, the fan contingent about this team still has it kind of together. And because, like, coaching decisions are coaching decisions. I think there's, like, organizational edicts that go down too. There has to be something that's come down from Marks and Sai, even maybe Sai, and said, hey, like, we're not packing it in here. Like, we got to make the playoffs. We got to sell some season tickets. Like, we got to, sell people on the future here. The KD and Kyrie thing went I mean, literally as bad as it possibly could have ever gone. There's no other way around it, right? Like you just traded Kevin freaking Durant in the middle of the season where you were like third in championship odds. Like it does not go better. It does not go worse than that. Like in terms of just like taking a massive franchise L. So I think that it's probably come down from them to say, hey, it's winning time here because we need to sell the fan base. And to some degree that's worked. Like, I mean, how positive have we talked about the team in the aggregate over this last few weeks? Like it has worked, but I think that's actually what's begetting some of these other decisions, which is like, because again, like look at these minutes tonight, 39 for Cam Johnson, 38 for Bridges, 39 for Claxton, 39 for Dinwiddie. I mean, these are like insane minutes for a 6 seed or whatever. So I don't know.
And if we're just going to tack into it, I'll just say around the coaching decision, because we know that Vaughn has the extension, so there'd be no obligation. He could have fun developing young guys at the back end of the season without feeling like it was going to hurt his status with the team. But specifically around two players in Seth Curry and Joe Harris, when you say coming from the top down, it's like, hey, remember, Joe Harris is a guy that I got off the scrap heap, Sean Marks, and brought him in here, veteran. We're not gonna sit him down completely. He's gonna stay a part of this. Seth Curry, veteran player. Doug was very disappointed, to put it mildly, that he was still on this team after the deadline. But he's a veteran. We're going to play him. You can make the case, Yuta Watanabe, a veteran in the NBA, but has never played at the consistent level that either of those guys have. And an Edmund Sumner, a guy coming off an injury, took a flyer on him, right? So I think there's sweat equity for a lot of these players that have been here that you continue to ride with them because you're not going to tell them that we bailed on you as being a part of this team. Even if that ends up being the case, we're not going to say that to you for the last 30 games of the season. Because then all of a sudden, then you've got half your team checking out and not wanting to be here and wondering, why wasn't I traded at the deadline? So I think there's a lot of delicate things to balance here in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're like weirdly like a sort of young / veteran team. Like they're a weird situated team. Like none of these guys are super young. Like even Bridges is kind of a little bit old. Like these guys weren't.
Him and Cam both 26, going to be 27. Yeah.
Right. These guys are kind of a little bit old. Dinwiddie's a little bit old in terms of just, overall trajectory. So they're just trying to, I think they're trying to, shoot the needle or thread the needle here a little bit on like just making everyone happy, fans, players, whatever.
Well, by the way, and I'll just quickly before we get into Christian's question, it's funny too. It's like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and even Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, like that is 4 of your starting rotation, but specifically Mikal Bridges. We're going to bring you in, but also down the back end of the season, we want to play you a lot with Cam Thomas, who we have some issues with. We want to play you a lot with Day'Ron Sharpe, who's developing, is going to have big, you know what I mean? Like you're going to ask Mikal Bridges to go out there. And to your point, it's like, hey, we got an 80% chance to lose a lot of these games if we run out some young developmental players. Get out there, Mikal. We're going to put Duke Johnson next to you in the backcourt, and we're going to run out some Edmund Sumner. Like you have to also balance it with the guy that you think is the new centerpiece.
Did you say Duke Johnson?
Did I say Duke Johnson?
Running back, third string running back for the Bills 2 years ago.
You know what? Sorry, I'm going to tell you right now. I've done that before on this podcast, and it wasn't about David Duke Jr. It was somewhere else that I said Duke Johnson. That guy just lives in my mind. For years, I wanted the Giants to pursue him. I loved him in fantasy. It never panned out.
Oh, Simmons. When do you think the last time Ben Simmons played basketball was? You want to guess? Don't look.
3.5 weeks ago.
He's more than a month. He last played on. Oh no, it's exactly a month when this clock strikes midnight here. He has not. He last played February 15th against Miami. He played 20 minutes. He had 5,020 minutes. He has no timetable for return. He's not playing this year. He's not like there's no chance. There's no chance. Like why? I don't know. I don't know. I can't believe I'm at a loss for words here with Simmons, but like. I mean, no one even talks about him anymore. It's probably the good thing for him, honestly. But but I just don't see any world, like for what, especially too. Like the vibes around the team. Not to say he's a bad vibe guy, but the vibes around like the team in these rotations at least seem like pretty positive. Might be a world where the Nets just don't even want to. Again, good.
No, tie it back to Dinwiddie. Look what Dinwiddie is doing as the facilitator and running this offense. If you're going to bring back Ben Simmons in some capacity, he can't shoot. He's been okay defensively this season, but hasn't been the player that he once was in that regard. He can't rim run. He can't rim protect. The one thing he does really well, arguably, is facilitate. So now you're going to end up maybe like diminishing a little bit, of what Spencer Dinwiddie is cultivating for himself here. I just can't see the world where you do it. It's a bummer. I will tell you, man, this is the biggest lead weight. We said this before. He's the lead weight tied around the Brooklyn Nets franchise ankles right now this offseason that potentially could be dragging them down into a difficult offseason depth when it comes to wanting to make other moves and the luxury tax and all those things. That money is going to be a huge problem after they re-sign Cam Johnson.
Yeah, it's a huge bummer. But anyway, long story short, my guess right now is he's not going to play again. And
thanks a lot, Christian.
Well, just remember that I said at the top of the podcast, the second I say stuff like this, the opposite comes true pretty darn quick. So
yeah, we're turning the tide here.
We'll get an update here that he's playing. He's playing next
game.
Right,
I think he's going to start.
Yeah.
I think
let's do one more and get out of here.
Okay. What do you got?
Dinwiddie's 30. Should they trade him in the offseason, get a younger piece that fits the timeline? He's got non-guaranteed money this next year. I actually don't know what the exact number is. There's a chance that they don't make it fully guaranteed. I'll see if I can pull it up really fast while we're talking. I think that he is probably a candidate to do a a deadline trade. He's not part of the future of what they're going to try to build here by any means. Like they have, he's just not on the same age curve as these other guys. He's been a nice player. It's nothing against him. He's, one of the keys that one of the few reasons they're able to score here, like somewhat consistently. But yeah, he's got 21 million next year. It's not all guaranteed. It's only partially guaranteed. And I'm not exactly sure how much it is. And I would be shocked if he was on the team, all the way through next season and definitely not the season after.
I think a lot of it too, if it was me, I'd be thinking about what happens in the offseason and what happens in the draft, right? The Nets need to prepare. If Spencer Dinwiddie's not going to be a part of the team long-term, it's going to be hard at next year's deadline, which I think is the viable time. Well, you're going to take Spencer Dinwiddie out of this starting rotation and replace him with what? Because that means if you're trading him at the deadline, one of two things. You have a younger player who's being productive. You went out and made a move in the offseason that you feel like you can replace him with, or the season has gone so poorly that you're moving off of him because he's 30 and he can be valuable on another team. And that's a whole other bag of issues for the Brooklyn Nets. So I think what they do this offseason in the draft will dictate what they can do with Spencer Dinwiddie potentially.
Real quick, we'll get out of here on this. You want something to root for tonight and then going forward? Root against our old friends from the Southwest, the Phoenix Suns. Right now, they're in the 4 seed, but they're only 2.5 games out of the play-in right now. Durant is not going to, and I'm not ever rooting for injuries, but Durant is not going to be back for the rest of the regular season. There is a world. There's a world. The Nets have the Suns pick for next year. There's a world where the Suns could fall into the lottery with a bad stretch here. Lakers won a couple games, although AD got hurt tonight. The Lakers have won a few. Dallas is kind of really skidding here, so we'll see about them. But if you're looking for another thing to root against, we're always rooting against the Heat every night, obviously. Impossible because they have a negative point differential and somehow 4 more wins than losses, which is totally ridiculous. But then the next team we're rooting against here is the Suns because the Nets have their first round pick. And man, if that turned into a lottery pick, even after trading Durant, that'd be really something. So if you're ever looking for like side rooting action, those.
Knicks losing to Portland right now too.
We're rooting against anyone, rooting for anyone the Knicks play, rooting for anyone the Heat play, rooting for anyone the Cavs play, and we're rooting for everyone the Suns play. And if we're just on it, let's just root for everyone Dallas plays too, just to get everyone pissed off because Kyrie's going to leave and then Luka will want out, and the Nets have those picks in like 3 or 4 years. So there you go. That's all the stuff we're rooting for right now.
Love all of those assets going to Dallas to get Luka to Brooklyn. Let's go ahead and just talk about that.
I'll put it on the table, buddy. Speak it into existence. All right, we're going to get out of here. Really appreciate everyone still hanging around. We're going to go get this podcast posted up. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.